Hi, folks. So this is the follow-up. I guess we could consider it part two to my video on the Gary Lineker story, which has blown up to be quite a big story. Actually, one angle about all of this is, ironically, that the BBC's coverage of the story, which directly involves the BBC, is excessive when there's more important things going on in the world. Um, I'm not sure I entirely agree with that. I think that there are some valid discussion points around this. But I understand the contention. There are bigger things going on in the world. But I've come across three articles, and I'm not going to read them all out, it would simply take too long. But they're all touching on this, and they're all critical of Lineker. Now, the interesting thing is the sources, because two of them are from the newspaper, and it might surprise my viewers, but they're not necessarily on the side of Lineker. Uh, let's see, this is from the 10th of March. Analysis: the BBC must be impartial and bigger than its presenters. Sarah Sands. A piece in the newspaper. Also in the same edition, My View by Kate Maltby. Lineker's language isn't the problem. His chosen route to sainthood is in snide tweets that offer no solutions. And I'd agree with that. I haven't read these articles extensively, but the gist of them I'd go with. That's the I'm referring to there. And there was one other piece that did sway me particularly, and that was by, let me just get this up, by Stephen Daisley on the online edition of the Spectator. Um, so all three pieces are critical of Lineker, but also critical of the BBC's response to this. Um, and basically, I'll just look at this piece by Stephen Daisley. The BBC shouldn't have taken Gary Lineker off air. Um, I don't know if you saw that shaking. It's been doing this a lot recently. Uh, I don't want to restart the video, so I'm just go very carefully. I don't want to restart this video. Right, let's see. Stephen Daisley. The BBC's decision to take Gary Lineker off the air is a sort of self-harming stupidity at which the corporation excels. The Match of the Day presenter tweeted that the illegal migration bill was an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people and done in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s, presumably referring to the Home Secretary. As his social media activity makes clear, Lineker's views are checklist progressive, anti-Tory, pro-Palestinian, anti-Brexit, pro-taking the knee. The BBC has previously censured him for a tweet it found to breach social media guidance and editorial standards of impartiality. That gets back to the point I was making that he's not a first-time offender. Um, and Daisley, as others have pointed out, has said that he's not a news presenter. Match of the Day is not a news program, so the implications are less serious than, for example, had it been Nick Robinson. But there have been other BBC people have pointed out that there are obvious double standards. They would immediately have been fired had they tweeted the things that he had. Um, Now, what Daisy is talking about is it's tempting for the right and anti woke people to sort of say, well, this is a bit of, now you know what it's like to be cancelled. You know, it's a bit of a taste of their own medicine in a sense. Um, as such, Lineker's right wing critics might say that getting him taken off the air is one in the eye for cancel culture. Let's see how progressives like it when one of their own gets the kind of treatment to which they routinely subject conservatives. Um, Right wingers might also object that they are compelled by law to pay for the Lineker through the license fee. They couldn't care less what political views he expresses, but if they're forced to line his pockets, at least they can expect that he not compare their views to Nazism. I think that's a valid point, a valid contention. Um, see, there was something else in his piece that stuck out for me that I want to just quote. Um, let's see here. For another, there is no good outcome for the people. I'll put a link to this. Taking Lineker off the air, it has confirmed the suspicions of every progressive that the corporation is easily cowed by the right wing press, or keen to suck up to the Tories. it relents and puts them back on air, which it looks like it's going to do, the BBC will reinforce the fears of every conservative who regard it as a bastion of left liberalism. Rather than cave into one mob or another, it would profit the corporation to stand firm in all cases, whether the pitchforks are hoisted from the left on or the right. Sure, there are some instances where this would not be possible or desirable, but these should be restricted to the most extreme views, such as espousing genocide, political violence, or the overthrow of an electoral democracy. Um, and very briefly, to sum up the other two pieces, what Sarah Sands was talking about was the Reefian philosophy of informing, entertaining, and this is referring to Lord Reef, BBC. Just bear with me a second, so I'm multitasking here. Talking about the Reefian philosophy of informing. Let's see. Yeah, to inform, educate, and entertain. And now the corporations become, figures like Lineker become personal. It's all about egos. Potentially, that's. I'm not going to summarize these entire pieces easily, but just a lot of angles I think are very relevant. Do get a chance to, well, it's difficult to read them now, but um, and again, Kate Maltby is talking about how Lineker's basically providing no solutions, and I agree with that. I mean, it's hot air. Um, so I've somewhat done a bit of a reversal on my position. Initially, I backed him being taken off air, and my whole thing on this was, well, yeah, he's agreed to the contract. He's clearly it's clearly a problem for partiality, whether it's his private social media account or not. I mean, Gary Lineker has 8.5 million followers on Twitter. He's a very prominent celebrity, so it's a bit. I think it's a bit of a phony argument to say, "Oh, it's a private Twitter account," because he's not a private figure. Um, and if you sign up to an organization or company, if you're effectively a face off, and people might say technically he's freelance, but he's presenting a BBC program, and then you plead that that's my private life. I think it's a bit of a disingenuous argument because clearly people are going to associate one with the other. He's espousing left wing views on a social media platform. It doesn't matter if he's not technically doing it in the show because that's what he will be associated with as a representative of the BBC. And that was my contention. And that's why I backed the decision to let him go. To put it politely, that was, a euphemism. I think they fired him basically or issued him to leave. I do think there's something quite smug about Gary Lineker. I think he basically defines metropolitan liberal elite in the sense of, he comes out with all his virtue signaling stuff about compassion and helping refugees and all the rest of it. But I think that people are a little fed up of a certain type of left liberal who loves to pontificate about these things but offers no solutions. Greta Thunberg would be another example, and there's many more. They don't really have any real solutions. All they do is condemn and criticize. Now, having said that, Suella Braverman's comments, I think, are inflammatory. I don't think they're helpful at all. I don't think she's a great Home Secretary. In fact, that's an understatement. I saw her performance at a select committee, and it was appalling. She was out of her depth. Her responses were just inadequate. In fact, she passed it over to a junior minister because she was asked basically if she was an orphan from an East African country as a scenario, how would she apply for legal passage? And she could not answer the question. One thing about this whole debate, I know where conservatives are coming from in terms of getting controls, but if you're saying people have to go by the legal routes, you have to make it as simple as possible. Just adding loads of red tape and bureaucracy and saying, "Oh, go by the legal routes," is a bit it's putting people in a very difficult position. So it shouldn't be more complicated than it has to be. I think basically people who genuinely are seeking asylum, I think that the path to that should not be overlaid with red tape and bureaucracy. Of course, you want to make sure that they're sincere, but I don't see any merit in making people who are already going through very, very difficult situations even harder. I mean, I remember when the Ukraine war broke out, Braverman's response was basically appalling. You know, well, actually, no, my mistake at that time was Priti Patel, but with them two, it's take a pretty similar stance. It's computer says no attitude. My mistake, that was Priti Patel at that time. Yeah, in the Johnson government. Anyway, yeah, so this whole Gary Lineker thing, basically the left and people who agree with his views more or less, they're making it a free speech issue. They're saying that this is, terrifying. This man's being silenced for his views because he dares to criticize the government. We're just like North Korea and Russia. I've heard people say that. It's clearly absolute nonsense, and such comparisons are odious. Gary Lineker isn't going to be sent to some penal colony in Siberia. He's not going to be languishing in a prison North Korea style, or Russia style for that matter. He'll land a cushy job and it looks like he's going to get his job back without any apology. Um, I do think there's a smugness about him, and these throwaway comments are not helpful. Really not. If he wants to seriously get into this debate, fine, but be serious about it. Don't just make these crude analogies to a genocidal regime. It helps no one, and it is so crass and inaccurate. Um, but the problem is with letting him go, it does fuel into that sort of he's a free speech martyr. But it's a difficult one. It is because the implication of letting him keep his job is he just keeps spouting off these views, and conservatives will rightly say this is bias. Actually, I think Timothy Davey is in a difficult position, um, and people are overlooking that aspect. He's under enormous pressure to deal with this um, bias issue that the BBC's been accused of for years. It's a tough, tough job running the BBC, not one that I envy. So I think people need to be somewhat, both on left and right, they need to be somewhat considerate of Mr. Davies' position. I'm not saying that the BBC always get it right. God knows. I think the license fee is very questionable. Um, but I would propose this, maybe sacking Lineker was too harsh, but I think some sort of sanction maybe would have been justified. You're a BBC employee, you can't keep just spouting out your views like this because it directly damages our credibility in terms of bias. So I think that's an issue. And I think as defenders, I'll close with this. Yeah, initially I backed him, being sacked. Maybe that sends out the wrong message, but I will say this. I think that his supporters are hypocrites. I do not believe that the same people, or at least a lot of them, would be speaking up for those cancelled by, academics who use the wrong pronoun at universities, or people who refuse to take part in critical race theory seminars. There was actually a case in the south of a nurse who, she was a white nurse, happened to be Christian, but she was penalised for not taking part in this, critical race theory seminar in which basically white people were vilified. There's a lot of cases like that going on. Whenever those are brought up, same people who are now defending Gary Lineker say, oh, it's just right wing scaremongering. There's no cancel culture. Cancel culture doesn't exist. So spare me the hypocrisy, really. By far, the most censorious faction in this country is the left, much more than the right. Um, I'm not saying the right's, never does it, but I do think fundamentally the left is more censorious. I do. Yeah, so there's a lot of hypocrisy in this. Or put it another way, if there's no sanction, at least there should be a counter to Lineker. So you might argue that his Twitter is a separate thing, but I do think his supporters need to be aware of the optics because people are paying the license fee and they don't want the highest paid presenter, one of the highest paid presenters, I'm not sure if he's still in the number one spot, pontificating. And they basically see it as them lining his pockets, which is where the metropolitan elite thing comes in. He's a wealthy man, very wealthy man, and he's spouting out his views, which as a British citizen he's entitled to have. but he's offering no answers. So my message to Mr. Lineker is, you know, these might be sincerely held views, but you're in a position where you're representing the BBC. So you can hardly be surprised that there's a backlash to this. You know, you can't have it both ways. I think if he really wants to be so outspoken, he should maybe run for office or voluntarily leave the BBC. But this idea that he's a victim of free speech, I think it's very, you know, that his free speech has been trampled. I think it's missing a lot of important aspects of this. I really do. That's my take on it. For the record, thanks for watching.